The shock of cold water hit me before the sound of the bucket even registered. 1 second I was dreaming about nothing in particular. The next I was choking, sputtering, and staring up at my mother's face, expressionless, like she'd just dumped out the trash. The water soaked through the thin blanket, pooling under my neck. "Get up," she said. Her voice was flat, practiced. Behind her, Elliot leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing that smirk he saved for moments when he wanted to remind me who ran the house. I blinked the water from my eyes. "What the hell, Mom?" "Language," she snapped, as if the word was the problem. "You're 18 today. Time to act like it." Elliot chuckled. "Happy birthday, champ." That's when I noticed the duffel bag at the foot of my bed. My duffel bag, already zipped, sitting like a tombstone. A dry shirt hung over it, folded neatly. My stomach dropped. Darlene crossed her arms. "You're a man now. Men don't freeload. We've done our part. Fed you, clothed you. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word sat heavy in the air, meaner than anything else she could have said. She turned to leave, already done with me. "Wait, what are you talking about? Where am I supposed to go?" My voice cracked halfway through. Elliot pushed off the doorframe, jingling his keys. "You'll figure it out. That's what adults do." I could smell his cologne, thick and sharp. He was enjoying this. He'd been waiting for this moment. He tossed a $20 bill on the bed, the kind of gesture people make when they tip a valet they don't intend to see again. "Gas money," he said. I didn't move. I just stared at my mother. She wouldn't look back at me. She picked up the empty bucket and left without another word. The sound of her heels on the hallway floor faded like someone walking out of a dream. By the time I stumbled into the kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee and lemon cleaner hit me. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a towel from the counter. She was by the window now, arms crossed, pretending to check the sky. Elliot stood beside her, scrolling his phone. I waited for her to say something, to soften, but all she said was, "Don't make a scene." The 20 felt hot in my pocket as I walked to the front door. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, dripping, red-eyed, older somehow. She followed me only far enough to close the door behind me. That soft click sounded final. I sat in my truck for a long time, the engine rumbling under me, the world gray and wet outside. Her words repeated in my head like a stuck song. "Be grateful we fed you." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. "Yeah," I whispered. "You'll be grateful too, one day." Then I drove off into the cold morning. The nights were quiet behind the hardware store, except for the hum of traffic and the rattle of my old pickup whenever the wind moved through it. I slept curled up in the back seat, wrapped in a faded blanket that smelled like oil and dust. The truck wasn't much, but it was all I had. The seats were torn, the heater barely worked, and every time it rained, water dripped from a crack in the roof. Still, it was better than the cold outside. Each morning, I wiped the fog from the windows and drove to the gas station down the road. I'd fill the sink with warm water, clean myself up, and change into the same set of clothes I'd been wearing all week. Breakfast was usually a stale sandwich or a cup of instant noodles. It wasn't good, but it kept me going. I tried not to think too much about what I'd lost, but at night, when the world went quiet, the thoughts came anyway. I kept hearing my mother's voice in my head, that cold tone when she told me to be grateful. I'd lie there, staring at the truck ceiling, wondering when she stopped seeing me as her son. There must have been a moment, somewhere between the bills and Elliot's voice in her ear, when she decided I was a burden. The idea hurt more than the hunger. One night, while searching my wallet for loose change, I found a small photo tucked behind an old library card. It was worn and creased, but I recognized it immediately. My mom holding me as a baby, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her eyes were soft then, full of warmth. I ran my thumb over the image until the paper nearly tore. That was the first time I really felt the weight of what she'd done. She hadn't just kicked me out. She'd erased that version of herself too. A few days later, a guy from the gas station walked over while I was refilling the water jug in my truck. He was about my age, maybe a little older, with grease stains on his hands and a friendly face. "You living out of that thing?" he asked. I hesitated but nodded. He didn't laugh or judge, just said, "Name's Jonas. I work at the shop next door. We could use someone to clean up after hours if you're looking for cash." I started the next day. It wasn't glamorous, mopping floors, sweeping up bolts, scrubbing oil stains, but it gave me something to do and a place to belong, even for a few hours. Jonas didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. He showed me how to fix small things, how to make tools last longer, how to keep my head down and pay attention. One evening, while we closed up the shop, he leaned against a workbench and said, "Don't waste your energy being mad. Learn how they beat you. Then beat them at their own game." Those words stuck with me. For the first time since leaving home, I felt a small spark of direction. Maybe I couldn't change the past, but I could learn. And one day, I'd make sure they'd remember the sun they threw away. The gas light in my truck blinked again, and the needle hovered below empty. I had only a few dollars left, not enough to make it through the week. The only thing worth anything I still owned was the old watch my father gave me when I turned 12. It didn't even keep time anymore, but it was real silver, heavy, with small scratches from years of wear. I stared at it for a long minute, then slid it into my pocket and drove to the nearest pawn shop. The shop was small and dim, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of metal. A row of guitars hung on one wall, their strings broken and tangled. Behind the counter stood an older man with thinning gray hair and glasses sliding down his nose. He looked up as I entered and nodded once. "What can I do for you, son?" I placed the watch on the counter. "Need gas money," I said quietly. He picked it up, turning it under the yellow light. "Nice piece. You get it from family?" "My dad," I said. I didn't mention which one. He checked the back of the watch and squinted. "Rowan," he read aloud. "Any relation to Elliot Shaw? He used to come in here a few years back. Bought up half the pawned jewelry in town." The name hit me like a slap. "You know him?" "Know of him," the man said, wiping the glass with a cloth. "Real estate guy. Made good money off folks who couldn't keep up with their payments. Some said he was doing them a favor. Others didn't see it that way." I forced a small nod, took the cash he offered, and walked out with the bell above the door jingling behind me. The cool air outside felt heavier than before. As I filled my tank, that conversation replayed in my head. My stepfather wasn't just cruel at home. He was the same way in business. Only this time, he had money and power to hide behind. Later that night, while closing the garage, Jonas noticed I was quieter than usual. "Everything all right?" he asked, wiping grease off his hands. I told him about the pawn shop, the name, the stories. He frowned and leaned against the wall. "Wouldn't surprise me," he said. "I've heard stuff about your stepdad. Some of the guys at the shop say he's been flipping foreclosed homes, sometimes before the papers even clear. Probably forging inspection reports, too." I stared at him. "You're serious?" Jonas nodded. "Man's got no shame. He gets rich off people losing everything. That's how it works for him." When I got back to my truck, the rain had started again. Drops tapped against the roof in a steady rhythm, soft but endless. I sat there, holding the cash from the watch, thinking about all the families Elliot must have ruined, all the people who trusted him. My mother was right there beside him, pretending to be the innocent wife. The anger didn't burn hot anymore. It settled deep, steady, controlled. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the truck, and whispered into the dark, "I'll feed them something they can't swallow." Then I closed my eyes and listened to the rain until the world went quiet. The garage work kept me busy, but I needed more than cash. I wanted to understand how Elliot made his money, how he managed to twist people's lives for profit. So when I saw a flyer on the gas station wall looking for a part-time male clerk at a local finance office, I took it. It didn't pay much, but it was quiet and clean, and it gave me access to a new world, the one where men like him operated. The office sat above a bakery, the smell of bread drifting through the vents. My job was simple: sort incoming mail, stamp outgoing envelopes, and deliver folders to the desks of people who wore pressed shirts and spoke in quick, careful voices. At first, I kept my head down and listened. I didn't understand half of what they talked about: liens, deeds, escrow accounts, but I started picking up patterns. Everyone there was chasing numbers that didn't belong to them. One afternoon, while dropping off mail, I met Maren Hale. She was older than me, maybe mid-20s, with short brown hair and a calm way of speaking. She noticed me reading through an empty file one day and smiled. "Curious type, huh?" she said. I shrugged, embarrassed, but she didn't seem bothered. "If you want to know how all this works, I can show you the basics. Most people here don't even understand what they're filing." That evening, when the office was quiet, she stayed late to explain things. She showed me how property deeds were recorded, how names moved through layers of paperwork until no one could tell who really owned what. The more she talked, the clearer it became how easily people could hide behind companies and signatures. Maren called it legal smoke. I started spending my breaks looking up public records on one of the old computers. Most of it was boring, but then I saw a familiar name buried in a document: Elliott Shaw Holdings. It appeared again and again, connected to different addresses. Some properties were marked vacant or abandoned. One in particular caught my attention: a small house listed as foreclosed 3 years ago. The last owner was a man named Arthur Laird, a retired veteran. The bank record said defaulted mortgage, but the transfer was signed by Elliott himself. Something about that address felt wrong. I checked the location, and my stomach dropped. It was the same property where my grandparents had lived before they died. Elliott had taken it, their home, after telling my mother it was worthless. He hadn't just stolen from strangers. He'd stolen from family. That night, I sat in the truck outside the office long after closing. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of a train. The papers I printed lay on the passenger seat, the names and dates blurring in the dim light. I thought about my grandparents' porch, the one I used to sit on during summer, and how Elliott had erased it with a signature. For the first time, revenge didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like clarity, the kind that comes when you finally understand the language of the people who wronged you. And I was learning to speak it. The invitation wasn't meant for me, but I saw it by chance when I dropped off mail at one of the partner offices. A letter addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Elliott Shaw mentioned a dinner for investors, held at their home. Reading their names printed in gold ink made my hands tighten. They were still hosting parties, still pretending everything was perfect while others paid the price. I decided to go. Not as a guest, but as someone delivering a message. I borrowed an old courier shirt from the office, packed a few papers into an envelope, and drove to their house just after sunset. The driveway was crowded with expensive cars, their polished hoods reflecting the porch lights. Music floated through the open windows, soft jazz, laughter, the clinking of glasses. When I stepped inside, no one looked twice at me. People saw what they expected to see: a delivery guy doing his job. The smell of roasted meat and wine filled the air. I spotted my mother across the room, dressed in a bright red dress, smiling wide, her hand resting proudly on Elliott's arm. She looked like a woman I used to know, but couldn't recognize anymore. Elliott stood beside her, louder than everyone else, bragging about profits and upcoming projects. His voice carried easily over the chatter. I moved quietly through the hallway, the sound of my shoes muffled by the carpet. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my hands stayed steady. At the end of the hall was Elliott's office, the door half open. The room smelled of cigar smoke and paper, a mix of arrogance and secrecy. Files covered the desk, some still open. I set the fake envelope down, took out my phone, and started photographing everything: property deeds, transaction lists, and a folder marked client approvals. Inside were inspection forms with copied signatures, all slightly off, all under Elliott's name. Each picture felt like a small strike, not loud but sharp. The light from my phone screen flashed across the papers, catching a reflection of my face in the glass of a framed certificate. For a second, it looked like I was staring at someone else, colder, quieter. Before leaving, I turned off the lamp and looked around the office one last time. The bookshelves were lined with trophies, photos from vacations, and a picture of Elliott and my mother smiling on a beach. I couldn't tell if it made me angry or just tired. As I walked toward the front door, I passed the staircase that led to the second floor. My feet stopped on their own. I knew exactly which door used to be mine. Curiosity won over reason, so I went up. The room was empty, freshly painted white, with nothing but a guest bed and a small table. No posters, no marks on the walls, no sign I had ever lived there. It looked like a blank page, one they had written over. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything. They hadn't just moved on. They had erased me completely. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the clean walls, then turned and walked out the same way I came in, quiet and unseen. The first step was patience. I gathered everything I had copied from the office: documents, contracts, and signatures that didn't match. Marin helped me sort through them after hours, when most of the staff had gone home. She didn't ask many questions, only saying, "If you're doing this, make sure it's clean." Her calm voice kept me steady. She taught me how to file things in order, how to cross-check the records so every detail fit. By the time we were done, the folder was thick enough to bury someone's career. Elliott's name appeared everywhere. He had used fake inspection approvals, moved money through small companies, and sold homes that should have never been touched. The more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Darlene's signature showed up too, always on the same kind of documents: co-signed loans, statements that claimed she verified information she couldn't possibly have understood. She had tied herself to him completely, and now, she couldn't untie the knot without falling with him. I didn't plan to hand it all to the authorities right away. That would have been too quick, too easy. I wanted them to feel the ground shake before it collapsed. So I started small. I sent copies of a few pages to one of their business partners from an anonymous email. Then another to a bank they dealt with, showing altered numbers in an account summary. I waited, watched, and kept my distance. Within days, things began to shift. Elliot's office line rang more often. Marin overheard him arguing during a meeting. Some investors started backing out of deals. Rumors spread quietly, the kind that crawl through phone calls and late-night whispers. The partners no longer trusted him completely. Every time he tried to defend himself, more questions appeared. At home, things weren't better for them. I passed by their street one evening, and the house looked darker than I remembered. The lawn was overgrown, the lights dim. My mother's car was still there, but I saw her step out to grab the mail in slippers, hair uncombed. Her movements were slow, distracted. Marin told me later that one of Elliot's clients had pulled out of a large project. Another demanded a refund. He was losing money fast, and people around him were nervous. I could imagine the shouting inside that house. Elliot blaming everyone else, Darlene trying to calm him, the tension breaking through every word. I didn't celebrate. I just kept feeding the cracks. A few more files went out, proof of missing payments, mismatched dates, a few emails showing forged approval notes. Each one hit like a small paper cut, not fatal by itself, but enough to bleed him slowly. As weeks passed, the quiet success of it felt strange. There was no rush of victory, no wild joy, only a growing sense of control. I was dismantling him piece by piece, and he didn't even know who was behind it. Sometimes I thought about stopping, but then I remembered the cold morning I left that house, soaked and unwanted. That memory was enough to keep me going. I didn't want them gone overnight. I wanted them to live long enough to understand what losing everything truly felt like. It was late afternoon when I saw her. The sun hung low over the garage, throwing long shadows across the floor. I was wiping down a set of tools when the office door creaked open, and there she was, my mother, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she should come in. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. She looked smaller somehow, thinner, as if the air around her had been taken away. Her hair was tied up in a messy knot, strands falling around her face. She wore sunglasses even though the light was fading, and her clothes were plain, not the kind she used to wear when showing off at Elliot's dinners. She stood there in silence, clutching her purse with both hands. I didn't move closer. "Micah," she said finally, her voice soft but cracked. "You've been busy?" I didn't answer. I placed the wrench back in the drawer and waited. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the concrete, stopping a few feet from me. "People are saying things. That Elliot's losing everything because someone's been spreading lies. But they aren't lies, are they?" Her mouth trembled. "It's you, isn't it?" I wiped my hands with a rag, keeping my eyes on the floor. "You drove a long way to ask questions you already know the answers to." Her jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" I finally looked up. "You mean what you did to yourselves?" Her breath caught, and for a moment she looked like she might cry, but she didn't. "Elliot's falling apart. I'm trying to fix what's left. You could stop this if you wanted to." The word sounded almost like a plea, but not for forgiveness, for control. That's what she always wanted. I took a step closer and said quietly, "You once told me to be grateful you fed me. I am. But you never asked what I'd feed you in return." She blinked, confused at first, then her face went pale. She didn't speak again. She just turned and walked out, shoulders shaking, her shoes echoing on the pavement until the sound disappeared. I stood there for a while, staring at the open door, the fading light spilling through it. Jonas came over, wiping grease from his hands, and asked, "That your mom?" "Yeah," I said, tossing the rag onto the counter. He leaned against the bench, watching me. "You sure this is worth it, man? Revenge has a way of eating you from the inside out." I gave a short laugh, but it didn't sound right. "Good," I said. "I'm already hollow." He didn't reply. The garage went quiet again, just the soft tick of cooling engines filling the space. Outside, the air smelled of rain and dust. I picked up my tools and went back to work, the same slow rhythm as before. My hands kept moving, but my thoughts stayed with her face, the way it cracked for a moment before she turned away. It wasn't victory I felt. It was something colder, something that had no end. News travels fast in small towns, even faster when it's bad. Within a few weeks, Elliot's name started showing up in conversations everywhere. At diners, in barbershops, even whispered between customers at the gas station. People didn't say much at first, just pieces of gossip. A deal gone wrong, a client demanding money back, a bank refusing to work with him. I didn't have to dig for details anymore. They came to me without asking. One morning, while buying coffee, I saw a headline in the local paper sitting by the register. Broker investigated for mortgage fraud. There was no photo, just a few short paragraphs. The article mentioned altered documents and pending review by state authorities. I didn't need to read the name twice. I folded the paper and left it on the counter. Back at the garage, Jonas noticed the look on my face but didn't ask. He just handed me a wrench and said, "We got work." That was how we dealt with things. Keep busy, stay quiet. Elliot's business fell apart faster than anyone expected. The banks froze his accounts, and the investors who once shook his hand now avoided his calls. Some of them went to the authorities, claiming they'd been tricked. I heard that his office emptied out within days, employees quitting, boxes stacked by the door. The man who used to walk into rooms like he owned them now couldn't even keep the lights on. Darlene tried to protect what was left. She gave statements to anyone who would listen, saying Elliot was misunderstood, that people were jealous of his success. But the more she spoke, the more desperate she sounded. Neighbors who once came for dinner stopped showing up. The couple who hosted parties now lived behind closed curtains. Even the country club that had always welcomed them cut ties quietly, removing their names from the member board. At night, I sometimes drove past their house. The lawn was unkempt, the windows dark. The once bright porch light now flickered like it couldn't decide whether to die or hold on. I didn't feel proud or even satisfied. It all seemed smaller than I expected, like watching a fire burn out after a long storm. I kept working the late shifts. Grease covered my hands, the smell of oil stuck to my clothes. When customers talked about Elliot's downfall, I stayed silent. They called it karma, but I knew better. Karma was slow. This was deliberate. Every lie he told, every signature he faked, had finally turned back on him. One evening, I finished cleaning up the garage and caught my reflection in the dark window. For a second, I wondered if he was somewhere doing the same, staring at what was left of himself. Maybe he still believed he could fix it. Maybe he didn't understand that the kind of damage he caused couldn't be undone. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the night. The sky was heavy, the air thick with the smell of rain. I didn't smile or look back. I just walked to my truck, started the engine, and drove off, leaving the sound of his collapse behind me. It had been a few quiet months since everything fell apart for them. I'd stopped following the rumors. I didn't need to. Their world had already caved in. Then one evening, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. "Micah," she said softly. The sound of her voice pulled me back to a time I'd tried to bury. "Please, can we meet?" Just once. There was a pause where I almost said no, but I told her where to find me. A part of me wanted to see what was left of her. The diner hadn't changed. The red booths still creaked, the jukebox still flickered, and the smell of coffee hung in the air. I used to come here with her when I was a kid. We'd share fries, and she'd laugh when I tried to dip them in milkshake. Now, she sat alone at the corner booth, hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. When I walked in, she looked up quickly. Her face startled me, pale, tired, lines carved deep around her mouth. The confident woman who once stood tall beside Elliot now looked fragile, almost transparent. "You came," she said, forcing a smile. I nodded and sat across from her. The waitress came by, and my mother ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Old habits die slow. She tried to hold my gaze but kept looking down. "I know you've heard what's happened. Elliot, he made some mistakes. Things got out of control." Her voice wavered. "We've lost everything. The house, the business, everyone's turned their back on us." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. She reached across the table, her hand shaking. "You're smart, Micah. You always were. You could help us start over. Help me." Her words fell between us like something heavy. I looked at her, searching for the woman who used to tuck me in at night, who once hummed softly while doing dishes. But that person was gone, buried under years of greed and denial. The food arrived, 2 plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. She didn't touch hers. I picked up my fork slowly, staring at the steam rising from the plate. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost quiet. "You remember when you told me I should be grateful you fed me?" She froze, her eyes wide. "Well," I said, setting the fork down, "I am. And I just fed you something you can't swallow, the truth." Her face crumpled, tears spilling fast. I stood, dropped a few bills on the table, and stepped away without looking back. The bell above the door jingled softly as I left. Outside, the air was cool, the street almost empty. I walked to my truck, hands in my pockets. Through the window, I could still see her sitting there, staring at the plate she never touched. The diner's neon sign flickered above her, the same way it always had, only now it looked colder, lonelier. Like everything she'd built had finally gone dark. The night was quiet when I started driving. The road stretched ahead, long and empty, the truck engine humming softly under my hand. I was heading back to the small house Jonas helped me rent, a place that finally felt steady, even if it was plain. The windows rattled a little, the heater clicked, but it was mine. As I passed through the edge of town, I slowed down without meaning to. My parents' neighborhood came into view, the same street I'd left on a cold morning long ago. Most houses still looked the same, trimmed lawns and glowing porches, but theirs stood different now. The lights were off, the driveway cracked, and a for sale sign leaned slightly in the front yard. The sight didn't bring relief or anger. It just felt finished, like the last page of a story I'd already read too many times. I parked across the street for a moment, the truck idling softly. Through the front window, I could see the outline of furniture covered in sheets. No laughter, no sound. Only stillness. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the greed, the years of pretending. They had done it all to themselves. I just made sure the truth reached the surface. The manila folder sat beside me on the seat, stuffed with printed emails, records, and signatures. It was everything that had built their fall. I didn't need it anymore. What I wanted was peace, not proof. A few miles later, I pulled into a small rest stop near the woods. The night air was cool and quiet, smelling faintly of pine and rain. I stepped out, tossed the papers into an empty metal bin, and struck a match. The flame caught quickly, curling the edges of each page. I watched the fire climb higher, turning words into smoke, then fading into thin gray ash. The wind lifted the remains, scattering them into the dark sky until there was nothing left. For a long moment, I stood there, my hands in my pockets. The sound of the truck's engine was the only thing breaking the silence. "I didn't destroy them," I said quietly. "They destroyed themselves. I just handed them the mirror." Then I got back in, started the engine, and drove toward home, the road open and empty ahead of me. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away and letting them face what they built? Or should I have forgiven them? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.